and the ways in which these teachings may apply to our present-day experience. This episode would discuss how the civilization of Atlantis came to be as developed and advanced as the stories suggest, and how its people received assistance from the Ra group in becoming so. David starts off by referencing the A passage in the Law of One which discusses just how many inhabited, third-density worlds exist in our galaxy alone. Questioner: how many stars, approximately, would be in a galaxy? Ra: it depends upon the galactic system. Your own, as you know, contains many, many, millions of planet entities and star bodies. Since the passage is a bit vague on its own, it may be difficult to decipher the exact meaning of this passage alone. Though within later passages, the text refers to humanoids as planet entities. If the text refers to planets and humans with this same vague term, it is quite possible that both the number of planets and humanoids falls within the magnitude of millions, as David mentions in his talk. He goes on to explain how the human form is an intelligently designed form, and that it can be seen throughout the cosmos. This repetitive form is said to be a divine expression, a sort of fractal template, or the expression of the universal logos, in Law of One terms. Wilcock mentioned a few interesting facts about the origins of the Law of One, and how strong the possibility that these channelings are authentic. As he has said in previous episodes, it seems to have been channeled knowledge from a higher source. This source called itself Ra, and had many similarities and correlations from the ancient myths of history. This source spoke on matters about which Carla Rucker, the woman channeling in trance, had no knowledge of. Carla was basically sleep-talking, but as she spoke, she mentioned numerous scientifically validated facts, many of which had not yet been discovered or disclosed at the time. David Wilcock was there to witness these interactions firsthand, and has spent much of his life from then on trying to decipher the knowledge given during those sessions. David mentioned the subject of an influx of souls who entered into the third density of Earth due to the invitation of the Ra beings. This was also a result of the dropping of the quarantine, referenced in previous articles. This subject is described in the following passage from the Law of One text. As described, these souls were invited to the Earth in a sense so as to provide the greatest potential for third-density experiences, and to create a greater potential for future graduation to higher densities. Notice the term planetary entities is used once again. Questioner: do any of them come here at this time in spacecraft? In the past, say, 30 years? Ra: I am Ra. We must state that this information is unimportant. If you will understand this, we feel that the information may be acceptably offered. The Law of One is what we are here to express. However, we will speak upon this subject. Each planetary entity which wishes to appear within your third-dimensional space-time distortion requests permission to break quarantine, as you may call it, and appear to your peoples. The reason and purpose for this appearance is understood and either accepted or rejected. There have been as many as 15 of the Confederation entities in your skies at any one time, the others available to you through thought. At present there are 7 which are operating with craft in your density. Their purposes are very simple, to allow those entities of your planet to become aware of infinity, which is often best expressed to the uninformed as the mysterious or unknown. According to this passage, one major goal of this third density experience is to become aware of the infinite, or the great mystery. David goes into the concept of free will, in the fact that the Ra group will not intervene in the affairs of a developing civilization unless specifically requested to do so. As he goes into the subject of Atlantis, he explains that this is what occurred there during the last 25,000-year cycle. These Atlanteans specifically requested higher spiritual guidance and wisdom, and as they did, the Ra group responded by immediately dropping the quarantine. However, when this occurred they threw open the gates, so to speak, and allowed third-density Earth to be accessed by multiple mind-boy-spirit complexes, per the law of free will. Due to the respect for free will, they also allow those on the negative path to have access as well. Questioner: well, then, as the cycle terminated 25,000 years ago, what was the reaction of the Confederation to the lack of harvest? Ra: I am Ra. We became concerned. 22.17 Questioner, was any action taken immediately, or did you wait for a call? Ra, I am Ra. The Council of Saturn acted only in allowing the entry into third density of other mind/body/spirit complexes of third density, not wanderers, but those who sought further third density experience. This was done randomly so that free will would not be violated, for there was not yet a call. Questioner, was the next action taken by the Confederation when a call occurred? Ra, I am Ra. This is correct. Questioner, who or what group produced this call, and what action was taken by the Confederation? Ra, the calling was that of Atlanteans. This calling was for what you would call understanding with the distortion towards helping other selves. The action taken is that which you take part in at this time, the impression of information through channels, as you would call them. Questioner, was this first calling then at a time before Atlantis became technologically advanced? Ra, I am Ra. This is basically correct. Questioner, then did the technological advancement of Atlantis come because of this call? I am assuming the call was answered to bring them the law of one and the law of love as a distortion of the law of one, but did they also then get technological information that caused them to grow into such a highly technological society? Ra, I am Ra. Not at first. At about the same time as we first appeared in the skies over Egypt and continuing thereafter, other entities of the Confederation appeared unto Atlanteans who had reached a level of philosophical understanding, shall we misuse this word, which was consonant with communication, to encourage and inspire studies in the mystery of unity. However, requests being made for healing and other understandings, information was passed having to do with crystals and the building of pyramids as well as temples, as you would call them, which were associated with training. Questioner, was this training the same type of initiatory training that was done with the Egyptians? Ra, I am Ra. This training was different in that the social complex was more, shall we say, sophisticated and less contradictory and barbarous in its ways of thinking. Therefore the temples were temples of learning rather than the attempt being made to totally separate and put upon a pedestal the healers. Questioner, then were there what we would call priests trained in these temples? Ra, I am Ra. You would not call them priests in the sense of celibacy, of obedience, and of poverty. They were priests in the sense of those devoted to learning. The difficulties became apparent as those trained in this learning began to attempt to use crystal powers for those things other than healing, as they were involved not only with learning but became involved with what you would call the governmental structure. Questioner, was all of their information given to them in the way you're giving our information now, through an instrument such as this instrument? Ra, I am Ra. There were visitations from time to time but none of importance in the, shall we say, historical passage of events in your space-time continuum. Questioner, was it necessary for them to have a unified social complex for these visitations to occur? What conditions were what conditions were necessary for these visitations to occur? Ra, I am Ra. The conditions were two. The calling of a group of people whose square overcame the integrated resistance of those unwilling to search or learn. The second requirement, the relative naivete of those members of the Confederation who felt that direct transfer of information would necessarily be as helpful for Atlanteans as it had been for the Confederation entity. Questioner, I see then. What you're saying is these naive Confederation entities had had the same thing happen to them in the past, so they were doing the same thing for the Atlantean entities. Is this correct? Ra, I am Ra. This is correct. We remind you that we are one of the naive members of that confederation and are still attempting to recoup the damage for which we feel responsibility. It is our duty as well as honor to continue with your peoples, therefore, until all traces of the distortions of our learnings have been embraced by their opposite distortions, and balance achieved. So we have the Ra Confederation answering the call for assistance by the Atlanteans. These Confederation members observed the same issues among the Atlanteans that they themselves once had. I gather that they also received a similar type of assistance during their development, which was why they sought to help in this situation. One interesting point to note, and David mentioned this as well, was with regard to the matter of priesthood. These Ra beings didn't refer to priesthood as that which involved celibacy, poverty, or much of anything we may commonly relate to priesthood. Instead, they simply used the term to refer to those who were devoted to learning. This means that by this definition, each person reading this and devoting their energy to learning all they can are in essence, priests. So keep it up. You're doing great. Another interesting point that Wilcock made was that Edgar Cayce is partially known for channeling Thoth the Atlantean. This character is also said to be the god Tatuti of the Egyptian polytheistic faiths. David made mention of the fact that in both cases, this character manifested as an avian, a humanoid with a bird head. This is of course, another correlation between the Ra group and the Blue Avian group being mentioned in recent times. The discussion continued with the mention of how the Ra group contacted the Atlantean priesthood. The contact first began with channelings. This is typical of assistance from higher, benevolent sources, as it respects the law of confusion. This ensures that only those who truly desire to learn and to know take note of what is being said, and if they are able to discern the truth from that which may come from negative sources, they are allowed to learn even more. Remember, both the positive and negative are available to those who are open, and it is the free will choice of anyone, through their thoughts, choices, and actions to attract either. Upon discerning this higher knowledge, those studying such insight will then receive more clear contact and understanding from higher sources, after which point, they may be visited by higher beings in physical form. The lesson these beings bring is ultimately, that among all of the endless diversity, differences, and variations of life, people and experiences we have, that there is only one of us here. When we learn this fully, we become the universe, the cosmos, and awareness itself, or realize that we already are these. This is a path that each of us is on, traveling at our own pace in our own way, and yet learning, remembering the same lesson. One more interesting point to note. The law of karma is designed to teach us in a roundabout way, that everything we do to others, we do to ourselves. This is why our actions tend to come back to us. David went on. The knowledge of crystals was passed to the Atlanteans by the Ra group, who also gave this knowledge to other ancient civilizations. The pyramids were a form of crystal, and were designed to capture the source field energy, or torsion energy, and create healing effects. This could be used for healing, for focusing of one's own energy, and ultimately for faster ascension. Here is what the text says on the subject of the pyramid technology. Questioner: we are very interested in the entire story that you have to tell and in getting into the law of one in quite some detail. There will be several questions that I'll ask as we go along that may or may not be related directly to understanding the law of one. However, I believe that the proper way of presenting this as a learning vehicle to the population of the planet that will read it at this time is to investigate different facets of what you tell us. You spoke of crystal healing. One other thing I might mention is that when the instrument becomes fatigued we want to cut off communication and resume it at a later time after the instrument is recharged, and if the instrument is suitable at this time I would like a little discussion of the crystal healing that you mentioned. Ra, I am Ra. The principle of crystal healing is based upon an understanding of the hierarchical nature of the structure of the illusion which is the physical body, as you would call it. There are crystals which work upon the energies coming into the spiritual body. There are crystals which work upon the distortions from spirit to mind. There are crystals which balance the distortions between the mind and the body. All of these crystal healings are charged through purified channels. Without the relative crystallization of the healer working with the crystal will not be properly charged. The other ingredient is a proper alignment with the energy fields of the planet upon which you dwell and the holistic or cosmic distortions or streamings which enter the planetary aura in such a manner that an appropriate ratio of shapes and placement within these shapes is of indicated aid in the untangling or balancing process. To go through the various crystals to be used would be exhaustive to this instrument, although you may ask us if you wish in another session. The delicacy, shall we say, of the choosing of the crystal is very critical and, in truth, a crystalline structure such as a diamond or ruby can be used by a purified channel who is filled with the love, light of one in almost any application. This, of course, takes initiation, and there have never been many to persevere to the extent of progressing through the various distortion leavings which initiation causes. May we further inform you in any fairly brief way upon this or another subject? Questioner: Yes. You mentioned that the pyramids were an outgrowth of this. Could you expand a little bit on, were you responsible for the building of the pyramid, and what was the purpose of the pyramid? Ra: I am Ra. The larger pyramids were built by our ability using the forces of one. The stones are alive. It has not been so understood by the mind/body/spirit distortions of your culture. The purposes of the pyramids were to have a properly oriented place of initiation for those who wished to become purified or initiated channels for the law of one. 2. We wished then to carefully guide the initiates in developing a healing of the people whom they sought to aid and the planet itself. Pyramid after pyramid charged by the crystal and initiate were designed to balance the incoming energy of the one creation with the many and multiple distortions of the planetary mind/body/spirit. In this effort we were able to continue work that brothers within the Confederation had effected through building of other crystal-bearing structures and thus complete the ring, if you will, of these about the Earth's, as this instrument would have us vibrate it, surface. This instrument begins to lose energy. We ask for one more query or subject and then we shall take our leave for this time, space. We see this pyramid technology worked quite well for the Atlanteans. However, it would later pose a problem for this civilization, as some of the priesthood would later choose to follow the negative path. This happened as the priests started to form a hierarchy which would ultimately turn into government. They started restricting use of the pyramids, and instead of allowing free and open access, made the people go through an initiation process. This is what would eventually form the hierarchy, and the consequent negative offshoot. This is most likely the true origin of the Illuminati, hence, the use of the pyramid in their insignia and propaganda. The pyramids of Egypt and those of South America would eventually be used for negative ends in this same way. This goes to show the principle that whenever higher knowledge or power is passed down, there is always a choice as to how to use it. Some choose the higher path of positive focus and service to others, while others choose the path of negative, unbalanced self-service. This can be seen in multiple instances, and in this case, was brought about by the gifting of pyramid technology. There are always those who take the opportunity to learn as an opportunity to take control and to seize power, and according to the law of free will, this is perfectly allowed. This is why the Draco were allowed the opportunity to influence the situation. The dark needed a more powerful source to guide them along their own path of darkness. This passage illustrates how the priests of two other civilizations perverted the higher teachings and turned to the negative path. Questioner: Could you give me a little more detail about your role with the Egyptians? Ra: I am Ra. The identity of the vibration Ra is our identity. We as a group, or what you would call a social memory complex, made contact with a race of your planetary kind which you call Egyptians. Others from our density made contact at the same time in South America, and the so-called lost cities were their attempts to contribute to the law of one. We spoke to one who heard and understood and was in a position to decree the law of one. However, the priests and peoples of that era quickly distorted our message, robbing it of the, shall we say, compassion with which unity is informed by its very nature. Since it contains all, it cannot abhor any. When we were no longer able to have appropriate channels through which to enunciate the law of one, we removed ourselves from the now hypocritical position which we had allowed ourselves to be placed in. And other myths, shall we say, other understandings having more to do with polarity and the things of your vibrational complex, again took over in that particular society complex. Does this form a sufficient amount of information, or could we speak further? So we can see that according to the law of one, some of these priests chose this negative path, after which point, the raw beings could no longer get through to them. This started in Atlantis and became the trend in other cultures as well. So ultimately, the Illuminati today is running on perverted Atlantean teachings and misused technology. Consequently, the Ra group felt responsible for catalyzing the difficult situation in which we find ourselves today. The law of one channelings are essentially an apology for this infraction. Questioner: then Yahweh's communications did not help or did not create what Yahweh wished for them to create. Is this correct? Ra: I am Ra. The results of this interaction were quite mixed. Where the entities were of a vibrational sum characteristic which embraced oneness, the manipulations of Yahweh were very useful. Wherein the entities of free will had chosen a less positively oriented configuration of some total vibratory complex, those of the Orion group were able for the first time to make serious inroads upon the consciousness of the planetary complex. This perversion of sacred teachings was the beginning of the societal problems we have today from such people, believing a version of the original truth, but to the point where those teachings are so perverted, they do very little good for anyone, if any at all. This brings up an interesting point, that not everyone who appears to be speaking truth is always trustworthy. The Cabal speak truth all of the time. The Illuminati and Lucifer worshippers speak truth all of the time. A major difference between they and actual, trustworthy sources is their inability to pass along information in a way that is free from negative distortion, from unbalanced, self-serving intent, and from trademark, manipulative tactics. Personally, I find it unfortunate that so few people in recent times seem to be able to discern, let alone care, about the difference between positive and negative sources. The negative always has manipulative intent which not only ignores the law of free will, but attempts to convince the audience that such a law doesn't exist. The positive are those who constantly remind the audience of their responsibility to chosen freedom. Notice David Wilcock is constantly referring to this responsibility of choice. For those who are awake, it is important to learn this difference, and to realize the fact that before we ever decide what to think, we should first learn how, not to be insulting. We all have a chance to wake up, but before we try to change the world, it's important to first wash the sleep out of our eyes. David goes on to describe the writings of Plato. One particular writing revealed quite an interesting addition to the details of the law of one text. In 360 BCE, Plato wrote a piece called Timaeus in which he tells the story of the experiences of a man named Solon as he spoke with the Egyptian priests. These priests told Solon about the ancient myths of the world that brought their people to the then present times. Thereupon one of the priests, who was of a very great age, said, "O Solon, Solon, you Hellenes are never anything but children, and there is not an old man among you." Solon in return asked him what he meant. "I mean to say," he replied, "that in mind you are all young, there is no old opinion handed down among you by ancient tradition, nor any science which is hoary with age. And I will tell you why. There have been, and will be again, many destructions of mankind arising out of many causes. The greatest have been brought about by the agencies of fire and water, and other lesser ones by innumerable other causes. These destructions are termed in multiple ways through the ages. They are called inundations and deluges to describe destruction by water. There were also instances of destructive events called conflagrations, which refers to destruction by fire, or something similar thereto. The Timaeus writings continue. There is a story, which even you have preserved, that once upon a time Python, the son of Helios, having yoked the steeds in his father's chariot, because he was not able to drive them in the path of his father, burnt up all that was upon the earth, and was himself destroyed by a thunderbolt. Now this has the form of a myth, but really signifies a declination of the bodies moving in the heavens around the earth, and a great conflagration of things upon the earth, which recurs after long intervals. At such times those who live upon the mountains and in dry and lofty places are more liable to destruction than those who dwell by rivers or on the seashore. And from this calamity the Nile, who is our never-failing Savior, delivers and preserves us. When, on the other hand, the gods purge the earth with a deluge of water, the survivors in your country are herdsmen and shepherds who dwell on the mountains, but those who, like you, live in cities are carried by the rivers into the sea. Whereas in this land, neither then nor at any other time, does the water come down from above on the fields, having always a tendency to come up from below, for which reason the traditions preserved here are the most ancient. At this point, Wilcock makes the point that the ancient religion of Zoroastrianism referred to this same destructive occurrence, describing fire from the heavens raining down like molten metal. The following passage comes from the site, The History of Zoroastrianism, and may have been the passage Wilcock was referring to. He will raise the bodies of the dead and unite them with their souls. There will be a mighty conflagration, and all men will have to wade through a stream of molten metal which will seem like warm milk to the just and be in very truth what it is to the wicked. The sins of the damned, however, purged away in this terrible ordeal, and all creation returns to its maker in joy. Ganthas. The description of molten metal may fit very well with the coronal mass ejection concept, as this may have been the most familiar reference to solar dynamics the average person of that time period may have understand. So we have the Egyptian mythology as well as Zoroastrianism concurring on this same subject of a conflagrative event. However, as long as a person is on the positive path, there is little to worry about. David continues with the time as passage with an important point. The fact is, that wherever the extremity of winter frost or of summer does not prevent, mankind exist, sometimes in greater, sometimes in lesser numbers. And whatever happened either in your country or in ours, or in any other region of which we are informed, if there were any actions noble or great or in any other way remarkable, they have all been written down by us of old, and are preserved in our temples. Whereas just when you and other nations are beginning to be provided with letters and the other requisites of civilized life, after the usual interval, the stream from heaven, like a pestilence, comes pouring down, and leaves only those of you who are destitute of letters and education, and so you have to begin all over again like children, and know nothing of what happened in ancient times, either among us or among yourselves. This passage reveals the likelihood of such repeated destructive events would leave the remaining people of the earth ignorant of the higher knowledge which passed to those more astute than they, as the more positive and astute would likely be harvested prior to such destruction. One major point this passage makes is the fact of consistent, predictable intervals of such a conflagration. The law of one text also mentions this consistent interval. Questioner: what is the length, in our years, of one of these cycles currently? Ra: one major cycle is approximately 25,000 of your years. There are 3 cycles of this nature during which those who have progressed may be harvested at the end of 3 major cycles. That is, approximately between 75 and 76,000, 75 to 76,000, of your years. All are harvested regardless of their progress, for during that time the planet itself has moved through the useful part of that dimension and begins to cease being useful for the lower levels of vibration within the density. In previous articles, we discussed how the Ra group played the role of overseeing the transport of civilizations to their most appropriate destinations on a soul level. David mentions how Corey has stated in previous episodes how the inner earthers also played a similar role, in that they sheltered those on the surface who were seen to be virtuous, from the predictable destruction which took place at these intervals. I find this very interesting because one specific channel, who most people seem to have written off, has been saying this same thing for at least a decade. This is, of course, Sheldon Neidl. Next week's episode is slated to cover in greater detail the subject of this end-of-the-age phenomenon referenced numerous times within the Law of One. Personally speaking, it's understandable to see why Wilcock has remained true to this storyline. Since I started reading and watching his material, he seems to do the most extensive research and multi-directional, historical correlation as anyone I've seen. I haven't yet seen anyone else out there who so diligently seeks such multifaceted understanding and insight than he. Not only this, but the combination of both the creative and logical aspects of the pursuit of greater knowledge within his research is extremely rare, especially in recent years. Anyone is welcome to whatever opinion they choose, but with regard to objective, scientifically verifiable information, Wilcock's material seems to be among the most sound, in my opinion. I look forward to more, but I look even more forward to actually experiencing this process of change, as well as sharing it with my readers.
Get involved and meditate with us every Sunday. Instructions at 2012portal.blogspot.com
Remember, like us on Facebook at facebook.com/the event is coming soon.
Be sure to visit our new website at theeventiscomingsoon.com. We have all the up-to-date intel and information about the event and disclosure progress. Theeventiscomingsoon.com. By subscribing to our channel, you will receive notice of our newest videos. This way you will always receive current information about the event and disclosure. Be sure to tell your friends also to subscribe and share on social media.
If you like this information, please subscribe to The Event is Coming Soon. We leave you in the love and the light of the one infinite Creator. Go forth and rejoicing in the power and the peace of the one Creator. Victory of the light.